Vivian Thomas was born into a family of carpenters. His father had high hopes for him to continue the family trade due to his dexterity and efficient work. However, Vivian's aspiration since childhood was to become a doctor. Due to financial constraints, he could only complete high school. Despite working as a carpenter, he never let go of his dream and managed to save enough money for college over 7 years. While waiting for the opportunity to attend school, he looked for jobs that would allow him to work in a medical environment. One day, he successfully interviewed for a janitorial position in a medical laboratory, where experiments were conducted on stray dogs. His duties involved not only cleaning the lab but also ensuring the health and safety of the dogs. Vivian didn't mind this, as the lab was filled with medical books, allowing him to learn a great deal while working. One day, while absorbed in a medical book, he caught the attention of a professor watching from outside. Instead of reprimanding Vivian for slacking off, the professor asked him basic medical questions, to which Vivian responded with ease. The professor then tested Vivian's dexterity by asking him to pick up a test tube with surgical tweezers. Vivian completed the task effortlessly, and the professor increased the difficulty by asking him to repeat the task with his other hand. To the professor's amazement, Vivian succeeded without difficulty, and was able to place the test tubes back in their rack with both hands simultaneously. Furthermore, Vivian could also use both hands to pick up smaller items like cork stoppers and precisely place them into bottles. His skill astonished the professor, who noted that many people practice for years without achieving such steadiness. This was a clear sign that Vivian was born to wield a surgical scalpel. When the professor casually asked about the name of an instrument on the side, Vivian was able to name the uncommon and complex device without hesitation. The professor felt as if he had discovered a new world. At the end of the day, Vivian received a white lab coat, transitioning from a janitor to the professor's assistant. Seeing himself in the mirror wearing the coat filled Vivian with joy, bringing him one step closer to his dream. One day, the professor planned to perform surgery on a dog and asked Vivian to weigh the animal to calculate the necessary dose of anesthesia. Vivian surprised the professor by already knowing the dog's weight and the exact dosage required. Vivian thought his life was on an upswing, but fate played a cruel joke on him. The bank where he had saved his money for college collapsed, wiping out the funds he had scrimped and saved over 7 years of work. The next day, he had to muster the strength to go to work, adjusting to the devastating blow. After preparing the experimental dog by shaving its fur, the professor drew a line on the dog's body and asked Vivian to make the incision. Despite it being his first time holding a scalpel, Vivian's movements were precise and efficient, quickly completing the task as instructed. The goal was to damage the dog's pulmonary artery to induce shock, simulating a critical human medical condition. If they could find a solution in dogs, it would represent a significant advancement in human treatment. The continuously dropping blood pressure readings on the monitor indicated the dog's life hanging in the balance. At that time, all surgical experts agreed that controlling blood pressure primarily involved stopping the bleeding. However, the professor had a different idea. He believed that restoring blood pressure required not only stopping the bleeding but also administering a blood transfusion. When the dog's blood pressure dropped to 40, the professor instructed Vivian to turn on the blood transfusion. As blood was transfused, the dog's blood pressure miraculously returned to normal, validating the professor's theory and marking the experiment as groundbreaking. Eager to review the work records, the professor was dismayed to find that the recording equipment had not been turned on. Upon questioning, Vivian appeared confused, as he was unaware of the existence of such a recording device. The professor was furious, declaring that without a record, it was as if the surgery had never happened, and no one would believe their success. His outburst left Vivian feeling deeply wronged. Having already been disheartened by the loss of his college savings, Vivian felt that enduring the professor's unpredictable temper was unnecessary. He removed his lab coat and left. As soon as Vivian left, the professor regretted his actions, especially after seeing Vivian's detailed handwritten notes that meticulously documented every detail of the surgery, even more so than a recording device could. The professor, in a nearly pleading tone, rushed after Vivian with the lab coat, asking him to stay. In an era marked by racial discrimination, the sight of a white professor humbly requesting a black man to stay was akin to something from a dream. Whether it was in pursuit of his dream or the respect he longed for, Vivian had no reason to refuse the professor. In the blink of an eye, 12 years had passed and their collaboration had spanned the duration of World War II. Their research was successful, saving millions of soldiers' lives. The professor gained immense recognition and was admitted to Johns Hopkins School of Medicine for further research. During a celebration hosted by the professor at his home, he proudly shared his joy on stage. Vivian, however, could only participate as a server, lacking the credentials to be recognized in such a setting. The results of their joint research were being celebrated, yet the professor failed to even mention Vivian's name, causing him great discomfort. Returning home exhausted, Vivian was met with his wife's complaints. His family had relocated for his dream, yet his modest salary barely sustained them. Meanwhile, the professor enjoyed fame and fortune. Facing his wife's grievances, Vivian could only offer consolation, promising that things would get better. The following day, Vivian officially joined the professor at Johns Hopkins. He had hoped that this pinnacle of medical scholarship might treat black people differently, but before even entering the gates he was stopped by security. Even the professor's explanation that Vivian was his assistant did nothing. Regardless of a black person's status, entry was through the back door. Faced with this reality, Vivian had no choice but to comply and use the designated entrance for black people. Once inside, Vivian, wearing a lab coat, drew odd looks from all the medical staff. While tidying up the lab, a white professor approached him, handed him money, and asked him to buy coffee. Vivian, refusing to be treated this way, pushed the money back into the professor's hand, asserting, "I am a doctor, not your servant," before turning back to his work with dignity. After preparations, a female doctor sought out Vivian. She was a pioneer in the field of cardiology, working with children suffering from blue baby syndrome due to congenital heart defects that caused a bluish tint to their skin from lack of oxygen. She believed that surgery to increase blood flow to the lungs could solve this problem. At that time, medical technology was not advanced, and the heart was considered off-limits for surgery within the medical community, leading to a 100% mortality rate for conditions like blue baby syndrome. The female doctor invited them to find a solution. Moved by the innocent smiles of the babies in the incubators and the tears of their mothers, the professor accepted this formidable challenge. Due to the fragility of infants' hearts, they started experimenting on stray dogs again. They lacked proper vascular tools and a working ventilator. Vivian leveraged his carpentry skills to assemble a ventilator from scavenged parts and designed a suitable vascular clamp with his precise craftsmanship. Vivian became so adept at the surgery that he could operate with his eyes closed, having memorized the intricate vascular layout of the dog's heart. His skill earned him the admiration of the university's doctoral students, who were eager to collaborate with him. The fact that a black man was working alongside white doctors led to him being given more food at meals, which irritated an overweight janitor. The janitor mocked Vivian, saying that even in a lab coat, Vivian still earned less than him. Vivian, who had always focused solely on his research and not on his salary, became puzzled by this. Upon checking with HR, Vivian discovered that although he was performing the work of a top-tier job, he was being paid the lowest wages of a third-tier maintenance worker, simply because he was black. Despite working tirelessly, he earned less than a janitor who had been there for years. Believing that the professor must be aware of this, Vivian decided to discuss the matter with him at the next opportunity. The next day, Vivian continued his experiments as usual. Seeing him work so diligently, the professor jokingly warned him not to kill another dog or he'd dock his pay. This remark ignited Vivian's frustration. He exploded, questioning how he could be paid the lowest wage in the entire medical school despite doing the dirtiest and most tiring work. Overwhelmed, he tore off his lab coat and quit on the spot. Vivian loved his job deeply, but he also knew his family deserved a better life. His meager salary barely covered their daily expenses, forcing his family to live in a cramped dark rental. Unaware of Vivian's struggles, the professor questioned what had upset him so much. Vivian, thinking the professor knew about the wage issue, complained about the low pay. The professor, mistaking Vivian's frustration for greed, decided not to intervene. However, upon returning to the lab, the professor discovered Vivian had successfully replicated the symptoms of blue baby syndrome. Eager to retain such a rare talent, the professor looked into Vivian's situation. Shocked by what he learned, he approached the dean to request a promotion and a raise for Vivian. After persuading the dean, the professor visited Vivian's rental home to show his sincerity. He was shocked by the living conditions. It was the first time the professor had visited Vivian's home in their decade-long collaboration. The professor sincerely apologized for the oversight, and not only secured a promotion and a raise for Vivian, but also an additional $300 in aid. Moved by the professor's genuine apology and improved salary, Vivian returned to the lab he cherished. Having successfully replicated blue baby syndrome, the next step was to find a suitable treatment. The professor completed the preparatory work and arterial incisions, leaving the more complex task of vascular suturing to Vivian. The professor knew Vivian's skills were more refined and even acted as his assistant. Vivian lived up to expectations, employing the purse string suture technique to successfully join the vessels. The symptoms of blue baby syndrome vanished from the dog, earning the professor's praise as nothing short of a divine masterpiece. However, the dog they had operated on died in Vivian's arms due to the rupture of the surgically created shunt, turning the lab into a bloody mess and taking the dog's life. The loss of the dog that had initially survived the experiment made Vivian consider stopping the experiments altogether. But the professor refused to give up, convinced they could identify and solve the problem. They realized that blood vessels grow with the body, leading them to start a new round of experiments. This time, the professor insisted that the skilled Vivian lead the surgery while he assisted. This experiment astonished all the doctors in the hospital, not just because it was a heart surgery, but because the lead surgeon was a black man, an anomaly in their ranks. Vivian felt immense pressure and closed his eyes to try to relax. Encouraged by the professor and relying on his own expertise, the experiment was a success. Eventually, the infant's parents consented to the surgery. To ensure the surgery's success, the professor decided to recruit surgical assistants from the medical school. However, many doctors declined, fearing the career risks associated with a potentially failed heart surgery. Even the dean advised the professor to reconsider carefully. External skepticism led the professor to doubt himself. He wondered if proceeding was the right decision. But with the infant's condition worsening by the minute, he decided to stake his reputation on the surgery. To improve the chances of success, Vivian crafted a specialized tool tailored for suturing the delicate blood vessels of children. As the date of the historic first human heart surgery approached, the professor made exhaustive preparations. However, Vivian, due to his race, was not allowed on the stage. The The professor could only nod in resignation to Vivian's well wishes, as the operating theater was filled with leading figures in medicine, all there to witness this unprecedented procedure. But when the surgery was set to begin, the professor hesitated, lacking the confidence to proceed without Vivian by his side. He knew that without Vivian, there would be no surgery at all. Ultimately, the professor walked out, ignoring the stunned onlookers.
Vivian Thomas. Paging Vivian Thomas.
Responding to the professor's call, Vivian rushed to the operating room, his arrival drawing jeers from the other doctors present. Despite the backlash, the professor and Vivian began the surgery. Although the professor was the lead surgeon, he frequently sought Vivian's advice, especially during critical moments when Vivian's specially designed surgical clamp was crucial. With the help of Vivian's innovative tool, the professor successfully completed the groundbreaking surgery. When the surgery concluded, the infant's skin color gradually shifted from blue to a healthy pink, signifying their success. While the professor received widespread acclaim, Vivian as a black man remained in the shadows, his contributions unrecognized. Some began to whisper that Vivian was the professor's secret weapon, and that the professor couldn't have succeeded without him. These rumors soured the professor's victory, making him feel overshadowed by Vivian. During a media interview, the professor and his white assistants were photographed together, but Vivian was not allowed on stage, nor was his name mentioned. Vivian could only watch from a distance, feeling marginalized. When the magazine featuring the surgery was published, the professor's image dominated the cover, with extensive praise for him inside. Vivian's role was completely omitted, which irritated him. He believed the oversight was the magazine's fault, not the professor's. To discern the professor's true feelings, Vivian disguised himself as a waiter and sneaked into a celebratory banquet the professor was hosting at a hotel. From his hiding place behind a potted plant, Vivian listened as the professor thanked all the white members of the surgical team from the stage, once again failing to acknowledge Vivian's contributions. Vivian was deeply disheartened by the professor's actions, unable to comprehend why someone who had always been friendly would treat him this way. His disillusionment was profound, a feeling only he could fully grasp. Wounded at heart, Vivian decided to abandon his dream and submitted his resignation to the professor, who appeared utterly perplexed, almost as if he saw himself as the victim. It was only after Vivian explained the situation that the professor justified it as the norm of the era, claiming society wouldn't accept the success of a black man. Vivian was astounded. He could understand societal rejection, but not the professor's. The professor retorted, questioning whether the years of mentorship weren't enough and accusing Vivian of ingratitude. At that point, Vivian had no desire to explain further. He had hoped to earn a formal medical degree, but was told he must start from the basics. At 35, with family responsibilities, he didn't have the luxury of time and chose a sales career instead. Leveraging his intellect and connections, Vivian's income far surpassed what he made as a doctor. Despite his financial success, he wasn't happy. Understanding his longing for medical work, his wife encouraged him to follow his heart. Bolstered by his wife's support, Vivian felt a sense of release. The next day, he approached the professor seeking reconciliation. Their meeting was quiet. Vivian was no longer driven by fame or wealth, but by his passion for medicine. Over the next 20 years, Vivian not only gained direct access to the medical school, but also his own office. He educated countless outstanding doctors, and his specialized surgical tools saved numerous lives. Years later, the professor, now wheelchair-bound, was invited to teach at Columbia University, and wished for Vivian to join him. After over 4 decades together, they were inseparable. However, Vivian gently declined, having established his own legacy at Hopkins. Understanding Vivian's decision, the professor reflected on their journey as they passed his portrait in the hallway, realizing that Vivian had no such recognition. The professor admitted to having regrets but couldn't articulate them. That night, the professor passed away with unresolved feelings. Hearing the news, Vivian sat quietly on a curb, outwardly calm but internally shattered. Their 4-decade-long bond, marked by a complex mix of mentorship, friendship, and servitude, had come to an end. Regaining composure, Vivian returned to his work, continuing to nurture future medical talents. Years later, as a recognition of his contributions, he received the highest honor from Hopkins, celebrated with a standing ovation. Vivian expressed his gratitude, humbled by the honor and supported by family and friends. During the ceremony, a portrait prepared by the medical school was unveiled, commemorating his achievements. Vivian's lifelong efforts were finally acknowledged, his portrait hanging alongside those of his white colleagues right next to the professor's. Overwhelmed with emotion, he shed tears of joy, his legacy immortalized on the walls of the institution he loved. Thanks for watching. Make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so you can watch more videos like this.